The original origin. The Emperor is the collective reincarnation of all the shamans of Neolithic humanity's various peoples, the first human psykers. The foul warp entities that would become the four great powers of chaos had not yet fully formed when the Emperor was born on Earth during prehistoric times, somewhere in ancient central Anatolia, modern Turkey, in the 8th millennium BC. But even before the birth of the Emperor, as humanity grew and progressed, the warp began to become increasingly disturbed by the dark undercurrents of humanity's collective psyche, and the shamans began to lose their former ability to reincarnate into new bodies. Instead, upon dying, their souls were consumed by the entities and demons of the warp. Eventually, the shamans of humanity, unable to reincarnate, would become extinct, and without the shamans and their psychic abilities to guide the race, humanity would inevitably fall prey to the corruptions of chaos, just as eventually happened to the Eldari. In these ancient days, all the shamans of Earth gathered in a grand conclave to decide what must be done to stave off the day when they had all been consumed by the warp. In the end, the shamans decided to pool their collective psychic energies by reincarnating as a single soul in a single human body to create an individual they called the New Man. The thousands of shamans, as one, took poison, and as one, they died, their souls flowing into the immaterium in a rush of psychic power that overwhelmed those demons who sought to feast upon it with a cleansing, purifying fire, a flame imperishable that became one soul out of many. One standard year later, the child who would become the Emperor was born in a Neolithic settlement of Anatolian herders and farmers of a normal mother and father with normal brothers and sisters. His psychic power was so great that its energies altered his genome and physiology in the womb and rendered him immortal, so he would no longer need to reincarnate and could not be assaulted by the demonic creatures of the Immaterium upon his death. As he grew older, his potent psychic powers began to manifest. For 38,000 Terran years, he wandered over the earth and throughout human history. He traveled among the different peoples of mankind. While he had first been only an observer of mankind's triumphs and follies, he soon began to help where he could, using his ancient wisdom to spread efficient government, crop management, animal husbandry, technology, and peace. He used his influence carefully, at first adopting only the guise of a normal man, and without revealing his true nature. As the millennia passed, the man who would become the Emperor watched the human race develop. He traveled the entire globe, watching and helping, sometimes adopting the persona of a great leader or advisor. In times of trouble, he became a crusader, a religious leader, or even a messiah. At other times, he remained a backstage contributor to events, an advisor to kings, a court magician, a pioneering scientist. Many of the guises he adopted were humble. Others became monumental figures of world history or religion. At times of crisis, he would be there, steering the human race along a narrow path to survival that only he could see. As the human race prospered and advanced, the warp became increasingly disturbed. The man who would become the Emperor was aware of how the extreme sides of the human character were feeding the nascent chaos powers. Despite his best efforts to promote peace and harmony across the old Earth, the instinctive values of martial honor, ambition, defiance, and self-satisfaction could never be eradicated from the human character. Some of the new man's plans proved less than successful. Seeds of wisdom often fail to flourish or grow into uncontrollable monstrosities, leading to eras of persecution and war. The Chaos Gods sensed the presence of the new man, the anathema as they would name him, and his efforts to curb their own power and growth. Even before they became fully conscious in the Immaterium, the ruinous powers recognized the man who would become the Emperor as their greatest enemy. Khorne was the first of the 4 major Chaos Gods to wake fully, and an era of wars and conflict soon raged across the globe to herald his birth. Tzeentch was the next, and nations and politics soon grew to maturity with all of their implicit intrigues and double dealings. Nurgle was the third to awake, and plague swept across the old Earth's continents, claiming many souls for the Lord of Decay. By the end of the European Middle Ages on Terra, all 3 of the Chaos Gods had awoken to full consciousness. The 4th, Slaanesh, still slumbered, to be awakened by the follies of a different species, the Eldari. But as the new man's psychic powers further developed, he became ever more aware of the terrible dangers that awaited mankind in the broader universe, and he resolved to do all in his power to defend and guide humanity towards a future as the predominant species in the galaxy. As more and more humans were born with the mutant psyker genes that granted them the ability to wield the potent powers of the Immaterium in the last centuries of the Dark Age of technology, and humanity suffered from the deadly effects of uncontrolled psykers that heralded the onset of the Age of Strife, the Emperor realized that he would have to take a more direct and open role in human affairs than ever before. Following the birth of Slaanesh, after the fall of the Eldari in the 30th millennium, and the end of the warp storms that had prevented interstellar communications and travel from the Sol system, the Emperor determined that the time had come to directly steer the history of humanity once more, or see the human race ultimately go extinct due to the troubles of the old night. However, the previous account is now considered largely apocryphal. In truth, the Emperor's origin and history prior to unifying Terra is largely mysterious and undetailed, though his immortality and extraordinary psychic abilities still define him. The first mention of the Emperor by that name in Imperial records is when he unified Terra at the end of the Age of Strife in the 30th millennium. Horus mentions that the Emperor lived in Anatolia in his own childhood, when talking of his first meeting with the Emperor. It is known that he had been immortal and ancient even before his ascension to the Golden Throne over 10,000 Terran years ago. The Emperor is the new man, the first and greatest of the new race of human psykers. He is also the collective reincarnation of the extinct shamans, sorcerers, and wise men who had guided primitive humanity during prehistoric times. As the Emperor grew older, his powers began to manifest themselves and become more potent, and he gradually remembered his thousands of past lives, adding all of their knowledge and experience to his own. One account of the Emperor's origin goes so far as to say that he had mortal brothers and sisters, and claims that he was born the 8th millennium BC in a primitive Neolithic village along the banks of the Sakarya River in Anatolia. While he was still an adolescent, the Emperor's father was murdered by his uncle. While preparing his father's body for a primitive funeral ritual, he received a clairvoyant vision of his murder. Later, the boy who would become the Emperor calmly approached his uncle and stopped his heart with a slight use of his telekinetic psychic abilities, displaying neither sorrow nor malice for the deed. According to the Emperor himself, this was the moment he realized that humanity needed law, order, and the guidance of a ruler to reach its full potential. At some time after, he left his village for the first city of humanity, likely one of the Sumerian city-states of ancient Mesopotamia. For thousands of standard years before becoming the Emperor, he guided and watched humanity develop over the course of its history, assuming the guise of a large number of historical personages. He was aware that the darker extremes of human nature were feeding the growth of the Chaos Gods in the warp, and so he sought to promote peace and harmony on Earth, and thereby curb the growth of the ruinous power's strength. Whatever his true origins, the man who would become the Emperor was the most powerful psyker ever born among humans. Before his rise to power, he was also an anonymous perpetual, a member of a mutant branch of mankind gifted with effective immortality due to extremely rapid and efficient cellular regeneration. Whether this ability of the Perpetuals came about naturally or was artificially induced is unknown, but the Emperor was present during the time of humanity's prior star-spanning civilization in the period now named the Dark Age of Technology. He was known to associate with other Perpetuals like himself in that era. Among these was a woman named Olivia Surika. Together, she, several other Perpetuals, and the new man traveled to the night world of Molech aboard a one-way void craft. There, they discovered a warp gate into the realm of chaos, which the future Emperor entered. He forged an unknown bargain with the Chaos Gods, and was imbued with new powers and the knowledge required to ultimately create the Primarchs. The Emperor left Surika behind to look after the Molech Gate until such time as the world could be safely protected by the coming of the future Imperium of Man. Despite his early dealings with them, the Chaos Gods themselves later recognized the Emperor as their greatest enemy among all the intelligent beings of the galaxy, naming him the Anathema. Only at the end of the Age of Strife did the Emperor emerge from obscurity to take a more direct hand in the future of humanity, conquering the warring factions of mankind's homeworld and establishing his direct rule over the old Earth. He accepted the deaths of the many innocents that resulted from his conquest with great remorse, in order to achieve the greater good of unifying humanity and protecting it from the manifest predations of the warp. With the assistance of the ancient Mechanicum on Mars, who joined with him and the people of Terra in the Treaty of Mars that formally founded the Imperium of Man in the late 30th millennium, the Emperor created the first Space Marines and fleets of interstellar starships that would carry his armies across galactic space. The objective was a great crusade that would unify all of the planets colonized by humanity during the Dark Age of technology prior to the Age of Strife into one Imperium of Man. The crusade would also subdue, destroy, or force into exile all intelligent alien races from the Milky Way galaxy. The galaxy was to become the Imperial Domain, the manifest destiny of humanity. The Emperor also created the superhuman Primarchs, from whom the Space Marines' gene seed was later developed to serve as his primary military commanders for the Great Crusade. The Chaos Gods, however, sought to thwart the Emperor's grand plan. The Primarchs were sucked into the warp even as they gestated in the gene laboratories deep beneath the Imperial Palace, and were scattered across the inhabited worlds of the galaxy. During the Great Crusade, all but 2 of the 20 Primarchs were found and united with the Space Marine legions that had been created after their disappearances from the genetic material that they had left behind. As the Emperor traveled across the stars, some humans wanted to worship him as a god. However, he forbade this, proclaiming, "I am not a god. Rather than enslaving humanity, I want to free it from ignorance and superstition." However, Lorgar, the Primarch of the World Bearers Legion, desperate to find some outlet for his belief that humanity must have a god to worship to be truly whole, gave in to the constant whispers of the Chaos Gods, and, after corrupting his legions to their service, sent his first chaplain, Erebus, to poison the minds of the other Primarchs and their legions. Just as the Imperium had reached its apex in the first decade of the 31st millennium, the Emperor's most trusted son, the Primarch Horus of the Lunar Wolves Legion, later renamed the Sons of Horus, fell to chaos as a result of his own pride, need, and ambition. Horus betrayed the Emperor, and along with fully half the Space Marine legions and Imperial Army regiments, initiated a massive civil war for control of the galaxy. This rebellion is known to history as the Horus Heresy. Though the Emperor ultimately defeated Horus during the Traitor Legion's assault on Terra, He was all but slain in the battle after suffering a crippling loss of limbs and mortal systemic damage. Only the life-supporting Golden Throne has sustained his living corpse in a kind of stasis, neither dead nor truly alive. Trapped within his prison of flesh, only the Emperor's mind is allowed to wander free within the Immaterium, still seeking to protect and guide humanity to an increasingly distant, better future.